Hello, my name is Erica Ebelhair. I am a second-year law student at Penn State Law and am participating in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For one of the lab's projects, Witnesses to Herstory, we are capturing women's personal experiences in education, sports, and the workforce, focusing on the 1960s and 70s. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Sue Ellspermann. Dr. Ellspermann is the founder of the consulting firm Ellspermann and Associates, is a former lieutenant governor of Indiana, and currently serves as the president of Ivy Tech Community College. Welcome.
Thank you. When you said the 60s and 70s, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am old.
Hey, my parents were alive for some of that too. So
Yeah, that's right.
now, clearly, you've dedicated a lot of time to being a public servant in Indiana, and I know you grew up in the state as well. So when you were growing up, who lived in your home with you?
Both parents, mom and dad, and I am number 4 of 6 children. So an older sister, 2 older brothers, a younger brother, and a younger sister.
Mhm. And now you don't have to break it down individually for each one, but what was your relationship with your siblings like when there's six of you growing up in a house?
Well, there were 4 of us in 5 years, so that was pretty compacted. I would say the boys were always in trouble because they were, they were Irish twins, 11 months apart. My oldest sister, 4 years older than I would say we didn't have a great relationship because I was just young enough to be a bother to her.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and then our younger siblings were really, we adored both of them because they were 6 years younger than me, so anywhere from 6 to 10 years younger than each of us, and so they were more. Um, they were the favored children in the family in a good way. Like we all enjoyed teaching them things and watching them grow up. So
So,
the 4 olders of us were, we were competitive and got in trouble, all the things that you would think 4 kids in 5 years would do.
mhm. And has that relationship changed a little bit as you've gotten older?
Probably not all that much. I mean, we're still competitive now. There's I'd say the 4 older ones we were probably more prone to teasing one another, things like that, even as adults. So there's still a lot of joke playing that goes on. And we still treat our younger brother and sister kind of special. Like they were they didn't go through the harder part. We feel like we broke in the parents, and then we
Mhm.
feel like the parents just gave the younger two whatever they wanted. So that's kind of it's still that. They're the favorites and we're the 4 older ones. So that's kind of how it still feels. But in a good way.
Good. So, with so many kids in the house, and especially with that age gap, how were chores and responsibilities divided among you?
So probably not the way that we girls would have liked. We had the dishes. We helped mom with the house. The boys mowed the grass and burned back then when you burned the trash back in the day, you would never do that today, but that's what used to be. And my sister and I would complain that ours were 12 months a year chores and theirs were during the summer chores. So, but pretty traditional along gender lines of the time.
Mhm. So it sounds like you wanted those to be reversed from time to time.
Well, at least to be a little more equitable
Mhm.
about the years, we would. It's not that we would not mow the grass or they didn't occasionally, though I can't really even remember a time my brothers had their hands in dishwater, but it was pretty traditional.
Mhm. And did your parents do chores along those traditional lines as well?
Uh, yes, with the exception that I would say my mom did just a little of everything. Yes, she kept the house, but she also did the books down at my dad's store, his jewelry store. She would be the amateur electrician if needed, and plumber. She would always try to fix things herself, which was a really good role model to me. She sewed, she did crafts, she just she just did kind of whatever came before her.
Mhm.
Um, because my dad was very busy, she knew he wouldn't probably have a lot of time. He worked long hours. I might have mentioned before that as it relates to chores, the the 3 girls were the ones that worked for my dad. My dad had a jewelry store, so we went after 8th grade, the summer after 8th grade, we worked every summer and every night after school. The boys didn't. So another difference. We got paid, but my sister started at 50 cents an hour. I started at $1 an hour. So it wasn't a lot. We made money, but we didn't make much. So that was just another sense of how things were divided. But mom then was sort of the person who helped dad. Dad had other help at the store, but she would also lend a hand when needed.
Hmm. So, did your mother ever have her own independent career outside of that, or just
Well, for a very brief time, she was a trained cosmetologist, hairstylist. So right after she finished beauty school, she worked for a couple years in Tell City
Mhm.
and then got married and then immediately, being a good Catholic family, immediately got pregnant. And from that point on, baby, baby, baby. And she was our hairstylist for the next 50 years.
And I'm sure you girls appreciated that.
I had many perms at 10 o'clock in the evening before school pictures the next day because mom was very good at that. Yeah.
Mhm. So, how did watching these gender roles in action, what did you think of that when you were younger?
I thought, yeah, and I was pretty outspoken even in the family that I believed mom didn't get um, the respect I felt she should have gotten from dad sometimes. And he was never overly negative, but he felt like his decision was the most important. His voice was the most important voice in the family. When, if you watched the whole, you saw who really made the family work.
Mhm.
And mom was very adept as well at managing finances of the house, helping him with finances of the store, et cetera. So she was very adept. But um, I was a feminist by the time I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I think I was watching the world change
Mhm.
about women and careers and really, thinking that I felt sorry that my mom didn't have the opportunities I was going to have, right? That she and he, both parents were very supportive of all of us, all 6 of us kids going to college, having good careers, pursuing, and that they did without, um, including my dad, not discriminating what I should do.
Mhm.
He was the one, in fact, who encouraged me when I mentioned engineering. He was the one who said, "I think that's a great idea." But in their own world, they lived a very traditional of the time, uh, of the man working outside the home and the woman taking care of the things inside the home.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned the girls were the only ones that worked in the jewelry store. Did the boys ever have to get jobs for after school?
Did, yeah, they worked, debeaking turkeys, can't be a worse job than that. They worked, hauling in hay for local farmers. They worked at the concrete plant, the Breidenbaugh's over in Jasper, which is, block, concrete blocks and plants. So they had jobs in the summer. And then my oldest brother, worked after school when he wanted to earn money to go to Germany. He worked at what is now Far Best, a turkey plant, back then after school every day, working second shift so he could earn money for that. Theirs was, now they were required in the summer to have a job, but during the school year, it was kind of like, well, if a farmer needs you, if somebody needs you to help, that's okay. They didn't have the expectations as the 3 girls. If I was not in school or in a sport or at a school activity, I was expected to be at the store during every hour it was open.
Mhm.
And that was just taken for granted, including during finals times, including any busy times that I might have had personally. That was part of how we contributed to the household. I think it taught me an amazing work ethic, but it was very different between the boys and the girls.
Mhm. Was the jewelry store the only job you had during high school?
Yes, during high school, it was because it was as many hours a week as I could handle. It was,
Right.
could be in the summer, it would be 6 days a week. During the Christmas season, like now, which we're in right now, would be till 8 o'clock every evening. through Saturday, including Sundays. So there would be very little other time, to the point that my mom would complain to my dad that, like, you're making the girls work too much. They've got school, they've got other things to do. But uh, at the end, it taught me to be a good time manager.
Mhm. Now, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about your early education. Do you recall what year you would have first started school?
We had no kindergarten, so I would have been 6 years old.
Okay.
Um, and when I was 5 years old was the year my mom and dad opened the jewelry store. So I actually went to work with them every day when I was in kindergarten, because that's what, mom was helping out. They were a starting business. So yes, I was 6, and that would have been 1966 when I started first grade.
And did you enjoy school when you first were starting out?
Um, yes, relatively. I would say it was okay. Meeting lots of new kids. We had nuns, and they were wearing, of course, they wore their habits at the time. So the nuns could be pretty intimidating. But I would say I mostly enjoyed school.
Mhm. What about the nuns did you find intimidating?
Well, don't talk because you'll get in trouble. And you just had to watch the rambunctious little boys around to know that you would get in trouble. I usually didn't need the direct contact to understand that.
Mhm.
But it was just a very structured environment. I think each year you become, by second grade it was less intimidating, third grade it was fine, but the first couple years it was more structure than I was accustomed to in terms of learning, but learning came easy enough, so I didn't have any problems academically.
Great. Do you recall what you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were in elementary school?
I think in elementary school, I probably thought Miss America, or, um, you know, something glamorous. I don't think I had any real um, vision of what I wanted to be. I think we always knew I can't remember a time where I didn't think I was going to college, because I think mom and dad spoke to those things. But I also knew that I wasn't drawn, even in grade school, I was not drawn to doing what other women did. I wasn't, other than Miss America, that looked like fun. But the other job, being a teacher, being a nurse, being an accountant, were not things that I thought I wanted to do.
Do you know why you thought that?
Um, I think from a early age, I was really, I don't know, aware of the different opportunities that men and women had. And I always wondered why women couldn't do that. Why did the girls work for my dad? Why didn't the boys? Why was he the breadwinner? Why wasn't mom? When I would think mom's really probably the more, don't tell my dad this, but mom's probably the more talented of the two. Why isn't she the one that had the career? Why didn't we go down that path? Or why is she staying at home with us when she has, or especially as we got older and she had more opportunities? So I think that bothered me, because I'm a person that believes everyone should reach their potential, whether you're male or female. So I'm not sure how exactly it happened, but I just became more and more aware as time went on.
Mhm. At any point during your education, what subjects did you find you most enjoyed during school?
I always liked math, and that started when I was 5 in the store, and my mom would make me math problems like 1 plus 2 equals 3, that I would work on while she was doing work. I would sit at the counter and do math problems, and they'd be so proud of that. So anything your parents are proud of you for doing when you're one of 4 and you don't get a lot of attention, that's a good thing. But math was something that came easily to me. Um, I liked reading. It was, good. I was a relatively art focused, and then I got involved in music in about fifth or sixth grade, both with band and playing organ, the back in the day of the electronic organs coming out. And that music interested me as well.
Mhm. And as you got older into high school, do you recall what classes you were required to take, if any?
Sure, had to take, the traditional English, you had to take a language, which we took German, most of us in our area because we're German ancestry. So I enjoyed German. English was easy for me, writing was easy, speech. I don't know if I had to take it or not, but I enjoyed taking it and got the speech award that year, so that was good. I don't have any trouble talking, so that was fun. Um, Math, I knew that because I was going to college, I would take as much math as I could. So enjoyed all of my math through senior level. Took physics, which wasn't required, but as I began to think I might want to go into something like engineering, I took physics as well as a junior. And then took drafting because I really did like mechanical drawing because that was the piece of I had watched my dad design our house, the house you're living in today, and I was so intrigued by the drafting and that he could do that, and so my junior year, I took drafting and was the only girl in the class, one of the very few, that period at our high school that had done that and loved it, and, so that was kind of what put me over the top to have an interest in engineering. But those courses were available, they just weren't encouraged, whether it was physics or drafting, those kind of courses were not encouraged for girls. You had to assert yourself to get in those classes.
Do you recall if there were any other girls in your physics class?
There were maybe, I have to think if there might have been one or two. I was a junior, so there were probably a couple of senior girls, maybe, mostly boys, mostly
Mhm,
guys, mostly all those who were going to pursue engineering.
mhm. You'll be happy to know when I took physics, I think there was actually more girls than boys, so.
It's changing a lot in a good way.
Mhm. Now, during your time in high school, were there ever classes that only boys or only girls were required to take?
Junior high, we would have had home ec that was all girls, and I guess the boys took industrial arts of some kind. Um, but in high school, we had our PE would have been girls only, boys only. But short of that, I think those were the only ones that really separated.
Mhm. Did you have a uniform for PE at the time?
Of course, they they were called. What did we have? We had a nickname for them. They were like shorts that had little snaps at the top
Mhm,
that we had to wear. Um, so yes, we did.
mhm. Were those uniforms the same for boys and girls?
Oh, of course not. The boys were, I think they had probably shorts and a t-shirt, some kind of, yeah, but not the same.
Is it fair to say you liked theirs better?
Well, I don't know that I would have liked either, but I certainly didn't like the things we had to wear.
Mhm. And just generally throughout your school experience, did you ever have a dress code you had to abide by?
Um, well, in what I thought was a Catholic school that was actually a public school, we wore uniforms until sixth, probably somewhere between fifth and sixth grade. And of course, the girls wore the pleated skirts, and you didn't get to wear pants in the winter, you wore skirts. Boys, of course, wore just a blue pants and some kind of a button down shirt. Later, we had dress code. Um, I probably was so thrilled that we weren't wearing uniforms that I didn't complain about the dress code because it was better than uniforms. But yeah, and then in high school, it would have been things like dresses. Well, dresses, there were issues about how short they were. I just didn't wear many dresses. And of course, you wouldn't have shown any cleavage, you wouldn't have shown any midriff, things like that. Um, but I had to go down to work after school. So I would have never worn anything that wouldn't have been okay with my dad either. So I probably didn't blame it on the school at all.
Right. Going back to the uniforms you had in elementary school, what did you guys do when it was cold outside for recess and you only had a skirt to wear?
You wore tights, or in the later years, they allowed us to wear pants under our skirts. that's quite a look.
I can imagine.
But that was on the coldest days, if you knew it was going to be really cold, and we walked at that time, we didn't live out on Vienna Drive, we lived in town, so we walked to school. So it would have, yeah, yes, were we jealous that the boys had pants on? Because we were only allowed to wear something under our skirts if the temperature was going to get really cold.
Mhm.
Had to be approved.
Wow. And how did that feel to see the boys a little warmer than you as you're walking to class?
Yeah, just one more thing. It wasn't, I don't think we dwelled on it a lot other than to say this was one more inequity in life, right?
Hmm. Yeah. During your time at school, did you ever receive education about menstruation or puberty?
Yeah, I'm sure in 8th or 9th grade, maybe 7th grade. I don't, but remember I had a sister who was 4 years older. So by then I was buying her tampons and all those things for her. So I had seen secondhand, and I didn't go through puberty until I was a sophomore in high school. So
Mhm.
I had plenty of time to learn about it before it happened.
Did the boys have to attend that kind of education at school?
I don't think so. I don't know. We would have assumed that they would have gotten it in whatever their same sex, maybe in their PE class or something. I don't really recall. And then by the time we hit biology 2 or somewhere later, I'm sure we all that all that what it would you say? I don't want to say the thrill of learning it, but all of that would have been well past by that time.
Mhm. So unsure if they had it, but definitely didn't have it with the girls.
Not with the girls.
Mhm. During high school, did you participate in any sports or any other sort of clubs or activities?
Yes, I ran track for 4 years. I was in the marching band. I was in band and marching band. So I twirled rifle and led the rifle corps. So that was kind of a leadership piece. I was in all the clubs, National Honor Society, Beta Club, trying to think what student council. I don't know what else I'm missing, but those would be sort of the major. We didn't have many sports to pick from. So
Mhm.
track was my year round that fit in with the rest of my schedule.
Now, when you ran track, that was separate from your PE classes, correct?
Correct. Oh, correct. Yeah, I was a hurdler, a sprinter, and a hurdler.
Okay. I know there weren't many options, but do you recall what some of the other sports available to girls were?
The only other, when I was a freshman, the only other sport was volleyball,
Mhm.
which would have been a fall sport competing with band, marching band. So, and I was short. I would not have made a good volleyball player. And then when I was a junior, they did begin um, tennis and girls basketball either my junior or senior year. So, but by that time, I was committed to track and other things.
Mhm. Do you happen to remember what sports the boys could play?
So they would have had my freshman year, they would have had cross country, basketball, baseball, golf. Trying to think if they're what track, of course, in the spring. I think that's most of the sports.
Mhm. Do you think had you had the opportunity to participate in those different sports, you would have either done more or something other than track?
I would certainly have tried others, like if girls softball, which is out there today, would have been, I probably would have done tennis back then. That was another one I had an interest in, but just didn't fit in my schedule by the time it came along. I doubt that I would have done basketball being as short as I am, but uh, the others, I would have tried other things for sure.
Mhm. They always need point guards.
Yes, but you got to be able to dribble too. So.
Now, I know you ultimately did pursue engineering, but during high school, was there anyone, whether it's your parents or a teacher, that really supported that decision?
There was no teacher that supported it. Really, my counselor actually discouraged me from engineering, and it was my dad who said, "I think that's a good idea." Um, I didn't have a lot of respect for that counselor, so it may have motivated me as much as anything when he said, "Oh, you wouldn't be good at it," because I like to prove people wrong. But there wasn't a lot of guidance for most of us, right? If you weren't, I'm married to a star athlete from that time because he was going to be on scholarship, and there's a lot of attention put on those top two or three. The rest, if you weren't one of those, you didn't get a lot of attention.
Mhm.
And I was lucky that I had three older siblings who were already in college. So I had lots of support at home recommending how I would need why I took physics, why I stayed in drafting, how I prepared, why I made sure I took all the math available at the high school was
Mhm.
because I had good coaching from my older siblings.
And how did teachers like your physics and drafting teachers motivate you or maybe treat you compared to the boy students?
Um, I did well in both of the classes, so no issue with the teachers.
Mhm.
They probably didn't see, um, I think my drafting teacher would have said, "Hey, you should go into drafting." I don't think he would have said, "You should go into engineering," right? There's a difference. He would have seen, because I was skilled at drafting, he would have said, "This is something you're good at. You should consider doing it." But I don't know that the teachers, and the same in physics, I don't know that they would have aspired
Mhm.
to my potential as they would have to my male colleagues in the class.
Mhm. You mentioned how helpful it was to have three siblings in college already. Did you have any friends who were going to college for non-traditional female careers?
Not really. Most of my friends were going into nursing or education. Those were, in fact, pretty much all of them went one of those two directions. The exception was at Girls State, which I went to after my junior year. My roommate there was going to West Point,
Mhm.
and that just blew my mind, like, wow, women can go to West Point. It was such a big deal. And then uh, she aspired to it, and then she got in, I should say, over that next year. So that had a lot of influence in my mind of like, hey, she's making things happen. I can do it. And she was in the very first class of women at West Point.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Well, speaking of continuing education, you graduated high school in 78 and then went to Purdue for your industrial engineering degree. How did you decide that's where you wanted to go?
So I wanted to apply to Rose-Hulman, which was at the time an all-boys school, but because this friend was going to West Point, I believed Rose-Hulman might open themselves up to women. But I was told very clearly that that was not going to happen when Rose-Hulman visited our high school. So I looked to apply other places, and Purdue, being the state school, was the one that I applied to. I had no idea the quality of the program till I got there, but it is one of the top ranked engineering programs in the country. So that was great. It also happened to have, of its 10,000 engineering students, about 1,000 of them were women. Purdue was ahead of their time with they had a Society of Women Engineers. They did a lot of support for women in engineering. So that made me feel comfortable that that was a good place to be. And then freshman year, you get to explore all the engineering professions because I would not have had a clue. But after week, hearing about different kinds of engineering, industrial engineering really piqued my interest because it's more about people and systems and technology, right? It's a combination of things that fit me well. So um, that was my decision in the spring of my freshman year to pursue IE.
Mhm. So, as you became more specialized, were there other women taking on industrial engineering as well?
We had probably 20% ish of my class were women. So we were one of the fields that there were in freshman engineering, 10%. Now when you got I went closer to 20%. And I had some very close industrial engineering friends who were women. I had one faculty member in my entire 4 years at Purdue that was a female. That was real like, wow, you can get a PhD if you're a woman. That was an aha. But overall, Purdue was doing what they could. There were very few women PhDs to hire. So,
Mhm.
um, but overall, it was a very inclusive environment.
Yeah. So how did it feel being in that environment as compared to being the only girl in your drafting class in high school?
Oh, much better. Like it was fun to have other women. And look, I'm very comfortable being in a male dominated environment, but
Mhm.
so much nicer to have other females that we could, there were still faculty who were very um, not sure they wanted us in the room kinds that were just a product of their time as well. So it was nice having the support of usually, in a class of 30, there would be at least two or three other women. And because there weren't that many of you, we tended to know each other.
Mhm. So at the end of the day, was it perhaps maybe a good thing that you rose home and said no?
You know, I think yes, as much as no. I always think they were behind the times. They do accept women, of course, today. About a third of their student enrollment is female, and their outcomes are better than ever. So just as we would suspect. But Purdue was a wonderful place to be.
Mhm. Good. During your time at Purdue, did you ever live on campus?
I lived in the dorms 2 year and a half. I co-opted. So after a year of traditional, I went every other semester. I worked in Flint, Michigan. So um, and then I was a counselor in the dorms my last year. So I probably lived in the dorms about half my time,
Mhm. Were the dorms separated by male and female?
of course. They
Mhm.
were by wing by my junior senior year when was a counselor at Owen. They were it was an H hall, so one side of the H was female, one side was male.
Mhm. And what kind of rules did you have in the dorms regarding visitors?
Yeah, of course, no boys after, during the week, 10 o'clock. During the weekend, it would have been midnight or something. As a counselor, I had to enforce those rules later on. But yes, there were limited times of when it was mostly just end of, and it might have been before noon too, as women were showering and things like that.
Do you know if the male and female wings had the same rules?
Yeah, they would have had the same rules.
Now, you mentioned in high school running track, being a part of Beta, a National Honor Society. Did you have more or similar opportunities for extracurriculars in college?
I did. I marched in the band at Purdue my freshman year, and then when I came back my sophomore year, I got involved in student government. So you'll love this. I ran women's awareness, which was kind of the feminist part of student government. And the two projects we ran were getting tampon machines in the engineering mall, which didn't have them,
Mm-hmm.
and setting up an escort service for if you were on campus late at night to get home safely to other parts. So I did do those things, and then Society of Women Engineers, the Industrial Engineering Society, et cetera. So old masters, just a number of things. I remained pretty involved.
Mm-hmm. And how did it feel to know that the campus was looking out for women and having positions like that available?
It You could feel the times changing.
Mm-hmm.
So taking on those kind of projects and having them pretty well received overall. You could tell Purdue was trying to,
Mm-hmm.
especially in engineering. I can't speak for the other schools, but in engineering, they were making a real effort to attract and retain women in engineering.
Mm-hmm. Now, you graduated from Purdue in 1982, is that correct?
Mhm.
What did you do after getting your bachelor's degree?
So I uh, took a job, of course. So I had co-opted. So I had a job offer from General Motors in Flint, Michigan. And then I had two other offers, one with Frito-Lay and one in Michelin. Michelin is the one I chose. It paid the most, and it was in Greenville, South Carolina. So I worked at Michelin, of course, as a tire company. So I was an industrial engineer there. I realized very quickly that that was not the place I should have gone. Didn't enjoy what I was doing. So at the 1 year mark, which is you should always keep your first job for a year, I
Mhm.
called and reached out to Frito-Lay, and they still were interested in having me. So I moved to Dallas, Texas, uh, where Frito-Lay, of course, they have plants all over the country, but I started in the Dallas plant and then moved to corporate in Plano, Texas.
Mhm. And what did your duties involve at Frito since you didn't necessarily enjoy
Yes, say
working
that.
for
Yeah, it was,
Michelin?
yeah. Well, both it was production work for the first year. They expected you to learn how to run manufacturing. So I ran potato chip production. I ran the shipping warehouse. I was the first female to run third shift and those kind of things. So again, very male dominant. There were very few women in management or in leadership. So I did those early, and then I moved into industrial engineering in the plant. And then within 2.5 years, I was at corporate industrial engineering where I ran corporate-wide programs.
Mhm. Outside of the few women in management, were there other women at the company?
Sure, but very few in senior leadership. We
Mhm.
might have had, of the 40 plants, maybe, I've got to really think now, maybe two or three were women,
Mhm.
but very much as you went through, it was very hard for women to be promoted through the manufacturing ranks. At corporate, there was an attempt to recruit engineers, and I oversaw recruiting of industrial engineering when I went to corporate, and we probably were able to recruit maybe out of 100, like we hired about 100 IEs a year. We could probably recruit about 20% as
Mhm.
female, but keeping them and then helping them progress through the company was something that was paid attention to even back then. I would give Frito-Lay credit for being aware of making sure that you're continue, because I had many opportunities. We made the decision to move back to Evansville after the birth of our daughter,
Mhm.
but I had many opportunities that were before me had we stayed in at Frito-Lay. So I saw them as incredibly good at at looking out for my career. And I would have said similar at General Motors, which also was looking at how could they help women have equitable career paths.
Mhm. So just to clarify, the reason for there only being 20% women was due to availability of.
Right.
Okay.
There just weren't that many graduates, right?
Mhm.
And it even back then, I think some of the offers I got and the interest I got was because I was still a rare commodity to be able to recruit and once I had the co-op experience to go with my engineering degree, that made me very marketable.
Mhm. So how did it feel to be the first woman on third shift and the first woman, not the first, but one of the first women to
Yeah.
kind of grow this company's female presence?
Yeah, I remember having a lead person who in my first days looked at me, he was an older gentleman and said, "You're not going to last 6 weeks." And I said, "Piercy, watch me." Just smiled at him and said, "Watch me." And I had rules on my shipping dock, like no cursing, no spitting, because I had a lot of people who chewed. So there were just things that I did differently. And at first, I think I had on the shipping dock probably 25 young men, most of them 25, 18 to 25 years old. So
Mhm.
almost peers of mine. So they didn't really like having a female boss, but
Right.
that's the way it is, right? I so um it I think I learned to that who what my responsibilities were, that you learn by doing and leading and just seeing my way through what that would be like. But no real issues with them. And I always had HR and other supports if need be.
Mhm. Did those gentlemen eventually grow on you as they saw that you could do the job that a man could do?
They, the most fun was when I would have training during the day at corporate and they would run the shift that night without me and they would always show me how well they ran it and I would just applaud them like, yay, good, that's my job. And my job really was to help empower them to do their work. And I would do things to find ways to improve the doc, right? I'm an IE, so I was looking at how to make their work better and easier and more productive. And I think they eventually they appreciated that. So it was all fine. It
Good.
was a good experience.
Now, you briefly mentioned we moved back to Evansville. Is
Mhm.
that in reference to your
My
husband and
my
his?
ex-husband, my
Yeah.
ex-husband, yes. So he worked in Dallas as well, had an opportunity to come back after we had our first daughter. So that was 1986. And so I always say it was postpartums because I really loved my work at Frito-Lay. However, it was absolutely the best thing to do to be closer to family. Um, I then didn't have a job coming back. He had a good career this time. I had the higher wage and better job in Dallas, making almost double what he made. And when we came back, he had the better job. But I had the opportunity to start my consulting practice. So then the consulting, which working with Frito-Lay was wonderful and their consultant. So it turned out that my career took right back off. But it was an unusual and it was a good, I think it's what happens in dual career marriages today. You have to
Mm.
decide who's going to step forward at this time and who's going to step forward at that time.
Yeah. Now, you started Ellspermann and Associates in 1987.
Mhm.
What was it like to start your own company, having also just started to expand your family?
Mhm. Well, I was thank goodness for all those years in my dad's jewelry store
Mhm.
because I did know a whole lot about business. I knew how to run the book, to set up my own books and to do work with customers. I had a consulting colleague he was subcontracting work to me. So I was learning through him and I was still working with Frito-Lay. So I, I'm a pretty adaptable person. So I just figured it out. Right. And then I learned how to market for myself and build my own customers across the country and North America. And it was unusual, but it fits me because I actually like to do things that no one else have done, right? That was a good challenge. And it gave me a great flexibility as I was raising a daughter. I knew I wanted to go back for a doctorate, so that career also allowed the flexibility of being able to be in school and work. I'd have to work my schedule around school, but I could do both things. So it worked out beautifully.
Wonderful. Going back to your marriage a little bit, you were first married in 1984 to Ken
Mhm.
Ellspermann. Had you always seen yourselves getting married up to that point?
Yes, I dated a lot. I always knew I would, get married, have kids. That was just something, but I didn't ever believe it was going to be one or the other. It was going to be both. So, Ken also grew up with a big family. Um, we had German, West Side German background. It was it, it, ap- it appeared on the surface to be a good marriage, and it was for many years.
You mentioned having dated a lot prior. What was dating like for you growing up?
I grew up with brothers, so I always felt comfortable with guys. I was in programs that were usually dominated by guys. So for me, it was, I was very comfortable being with, and I liked going out. And so, so I dated. So I dated a lot of different people, and I think that's okay. That's how you figure out where your match is.
Yeah. Now, ultimately, you had two daughters with
Mhm.
him, not just the
Mhm.
first one.
Right?
Um, I believe the pregnancy test was available at that time. Is
Mhm.
that how you first found
Sure.
out you
Oh
were
yeah.
pregnant?
Yeah, with both of them, the pregnancy tests were out. But yes, that one, that both were surprises. We would have had both, but we hadn't planned quite yet.
Mhm.
But I'm one of six and he was one of six. So we came from good stock. So I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter when I was working on my doctorate at U of L. And when I found out what my due date, so there's never a question, was I going to have both
Mhm.
babies? Those are for sure. But when I found out my due date was the Friday before spring break,
Oh.
I told my OBGYN, look, I'm in school. If she doesn't come early, because I'd already had a C-section, you need to deliver her on that Friday before spring break because I got to go back. And you should have seen the look on his face. He was like, what? But he did agree, and she was delivered on the Friday before spring break. And that daughter has her PhD in biomedical engineering. So I say there's learning in the womb because it was okay. My professors thought I'd lost my mind, that I had a C-section on that Friday, and 7 days, 8 days later, I was back in class. So it was, it's not I wouldn't recommend it for other people, but it worked out just fine. And I was living in Evansville, driving to Louisville to work on my PhD. So I would get up, drop one or two daughters in Ferdinand, where my parents lived, halfway, and then drive to Louisville. And then at the end of the day, drive home, pick one or two up, go the rest of the way, and did that 2 to 3 days a week for many years till I finished.
Mhm. Well, we know how quickly you got back to work with your second daughter.
Yeah.
With your first daughter, did you have any maternity leave when you were working at
Yes,
Frito?
I did. I had 6 to 8 weeks, so I had vacation plus the typical 6 weeks. So I did go back right after, had her 4th of July period, and went back after Labor Day.
Mhm.
And now it's funny, I didn't even consider nursing after I went back. And yet my daughters now have nursed 1 or 2 years on all the kids. And I'm like, wow, I couldn't have even done that. There's no way I could have gone back to work as a professional and
Mhm.
continued to nurse.
Mhm.
Difference in the times.
Now, it sounds like your OBGYN was a bit hesitant, but willing to go along with your plan. So, would you say overall your treatment during your pregnancy
Oh,
was positive?
yeah, I had great doctors. And again, growing up around lots of women, lots of, big families, having babies was not something I was unaccustomed to being around, or having children around, things like that. So yeah,
Mhm.
good care.
Good. Now, you later married Jim Mailing in 2004, and you two had two more daughters. So had you
Well,
always,
his daughters. So
yes,
yeah,
yes,
so we're a blended family,
yes.
and the girls are almost the same ages. So I
Mhm.
have the bookends, he has the books in between. So there's four girls in really just over 4 years.
Mhm. So you had a big family growing up. Was that something you always saw for yourself when you were
Yeah,
older?
had we not divorced, I would have wanted a third child. Not a big family, but three would have probably been my magic number. Four is perfect, and having four daughters now is amazing, and nine grandchildren and counting. So yeah,
Wonderful.
it's been great.
As you mentioned, you had your second daughter while seeking out a doctorate degree, which in and of itself is very impressive. But what made you want to get your doctorate in the first place?
Because I knew at being 26 years old when I started my consulting practice that I was going to be difficult to talk to CEOs and really sell my services, which were in this creative problem solving, strategic planning area that I had developed expertise in at Frito-Lay, but trying to convince a senior leader that a 26-year-old knows anything of value was going to be difficult. In addition, I wanted to be the best I could be in that field. I liked what I did. It was a new field. There was a lot of the consultant I worked with out of Canada was doing a lot of research of his own. He was a PhD, and I wanted to extend the body of research. So I looked for a PhD program that would allow me to pursue what I wanted to do with my graduate learning, and University of Louisville was very open to that.
Mhm. And how many of your fellow students and instructors were females during your doctorate program?
I think I didn't. There was a female in the program, but I had none.
Mhm. Wow. So, having seen the progress Purdue had made with its undergraduate
Mhm.
engineering, what was it like to go back to that very few women in the field?
Not unusual because that's the way I spent my day. You know, in my school, it was always dominated by men. So it didn't feel very different. And again, to U of L's credit, their speed school, their engineering school they were thrilled to have female PhD students. They treated us, well. I never felt discriminated against in any way at U of L.
So, again, it was more a matter of females who were interested as
Mhm.
opposed to the school policy.
Correct.
And did this getting your doctorate have kind of the impact you were hoping and that you could be a bigger name in your
Yeah.
field?
It opened up tons of doors, probably more later in life. First of all, yes, it gave me the expertise I wanted. It took almost 10 years from beginning to end to do the master's doctorate. I took about a 4-year leave of raising that second daughter while working. So all this time I was always working in consulting. So it was 96 when I finished. I started in 88. And so 8 years that it took in total. So by that time, I had grown professionally as much. I had grown into the doctor, right? It professionally and academically. So by the time I finished it, I felt well prepared. And I would say the greatest thing it did was when I ran for office,
Mhm,
being selected as the lieutenant governor candidate, and then again in my current role, being a president of a community college without a doctorate. You can do it, but
mhm,
it's probably had more dividends beyond what I asked of it than the reason I originally got it.
mhm. Now, before your political career, before your current position at Ivy Tech, you did a lot of work in other places as well, I know. So, after completing your PhD in 1996, what kind of jobs did you take on beyond your own consulting firm?
Well, after 96 in 2006, I joined. Yeah, so I was in consulting from 86 to 2006. Then I
Mhm,
went to the University of Southern Indiana, started their Center for Applied Research,
mhm,
which was utilizing my skills in consulting along with the faculty there. So did that for almost 6 years, but at the 4-year mark, ran for office, got elected as state representative, stayed
mhm,
at USI for another year, year and a half, and realized I couldn't do the two well together. So I was going to go back into consulting, which was transformation team for a very short several months until I was approached by then Congressman Mike Pence to be his running mate for lieutenant governor. And then, of course, you run. So you run unpaid, but you run your campaign. And then we were elected that fall. And for the next almost 4 years was lieutenant governor prior to coming into this position.
mhm. Before we dive further into that position, I want to talk a little bit more about USI. Were there many other women working with you for the Center for Research, Applied Research?
I was the founding director of that center. So I was the only person. I had an assistant, and then I hired a full-time person who also was a female engineer. She was a
Mhm,
mechanical engineer, and then I hired contracted with another engineer, which happened to be an industrial engineer, and later became state rep. So I might have been biased in the people I hired, but I was looking for a skill set, and those were skill sets, and they were very like me, liking to do the variety of work that we did there. So the department I worked in was fairly, probably more female than male because it was continuing education was the broader area. My area was more technical, and then I worked with lots of engineering and business and other faculty.
mhm. So, how did it feel to be tasked with leading this new program? And being able to choose to have other strong, talented
Yeah,
women around you.
it was all, yeah, it was, Jim would always say that was my dream job. It was just a perfect opportunity to use the skills I had in a setting that was ready to do the work. And I was lucky to find the talent that I did. So we did, it was very exciting and fun.
Mm-hmm. Good. Now, as you mentioned, you had a political career here in Indiana for a while. You first ran for the House of Representatives in 2009. What made you want to seek out political office?
I didn't. I got my arm twisted. I went through the Luger series, which is a program for women interested in public service, and I wanted to understand how government worked. I
Mhm.
didn't, as an engineer, I'd never had any training in that. So I went through the program to understand as I was doing work with government in the center. And at the end of that course, I got a phone call first from the Senate and then from the House and then from someone in the governor's office to ask if I would run. And, at that time, my youngest daughter was just graduating high school, and I thought, I can do this.
How did it feel knowing that you were going up against a 14-year incumbent?
I was sure I would lose. But I ran mostly because I didn't think I had a reason not to.
Mhm.
And if you're going to make change, you have to take the chance. So, and I do like big challenges. At the end of the day, my husband Jim would say, Sue, I knew from the minute they said they wanted you to run that you would run. And I kept saying, no, I don't want to do this. This isn't. And the more I thought about it, it became a really big challenge. So
So, how did you feel when you ultimately did win, going in as what you
uh,
thought the underdog?
I was the underdog for sure. Surprised and then thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this job. I'm an engineer. I don't know how to do this job. But again, like every other job, you figure it out, you learn. So it was, again, an exciting time. It was a great privilege to serve 65,000 people in Southern Indiana, so many people that I had grown up with in my district. So I felt the responsibility of making a positive impact while I was there.
Mhm. So, what were your primary objectives once you were elected?
So economic development was always one of mine, making sure that the economy was stronger, that we were building the kind of industries, attracting the industries, educational attainment. And then I was a pro-life as well. I believe strongly in that, and I have my misgivings about how the Supreme Court stuff has gone since there, but felt strongly in as a pro-life candidate.
Mhm.
But education, economic development, and pro-life.
Mhm. Now, as you also mentioned, you ran as lieutenant governor with Mike Pence in
Mhm.
2012. How did you feel going into that political race?
We were expected to win. We're a red state, following Mitch Daniels, a strong administration, expected that we would win. There really was not a question throughout the campaign, though we only won by 4 percentage points, which to me is just fine. We ran a politically civil campaign, which is important to me,
Mhm.
and so and I think I learned during that time a lot about developing, setting policy for the state, and it was a good experience.
Mhm. And were your objectives similar as lieutenant governor as they were when you were in the House?
Um, yes, but you're number 2. So you're the as a lieutenant governor, it is not your agenda, it's the governor's agenda. You've had a hand in it, but it's his final hand.
Mhm.
And so I I got to have influence over which agencies I oversaw. I had 7 agencies. Um, Secretary of Agriculture as president of the Senate, and then 6 other agencies like Office of Community Rural Affairs, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, which was an agency I stood up. 2 agencies I stood up for the first time. That was one of them. The other, Office of Defense Development, to ensure we were taking care of a big military asset called Crane in southern Indiana. So I could influence to those, and I stayed very involved with that work around the economic development. And I was the vice chair of the career council that oversaw the education and workforce strategic plan for the state. So yes, I stayed pretty aligned with those original objectives, except I added agriculture, which I knew nothing about, except that I grew up in a farming community.
So, how did it feel to go from not wanting to be in politics at all to the second highest office in the state?
Pretty crazy. And at times, I mean, just people always assumed what was funny was before I was elected, I was this professional known in the community in a certain way. The minute you're elected, you're assumed to be a politico, a all you've done that's the only thing you've thought of your whole life. And
Mm,
I never was that person. I'm first and foremost a problem solver and I want to make positive change. And you can do that as an engineer, you can do that as a business owner, or you can do that as an elected public servant. I just
mhm,
happen to be in that third box now. And so it was how people looked at me, not so much how I looked at myself, but
mhm,
how I know I got looked at in a whole different way.
mhm. Now, in 2016, you left that position to serve as president of Ivy Tech. Why did you make that switch?
Because, first of all, some of their trustees approached me about because of my deep engagement with the state's career and education strategic plan, because of my 6 years at the University of Southern Indiana, because of the earned PhD. I had people approaching me to think about it, and I had traveled 92 counties of Indiana, and I understood that there were communities that had come back and there were communities who had not, and that
Mhm,
higher education was key. And Ivy Tech is a unique statewide system with
mhm,
today we serve 180,000 students. You can make a lot of change, and the way you make change is by educating a workforce, not to end at an associate degree, but to help people get into and up the rungs of the ladder until a point where they have other options as well to finish a bachelor's, to do other things, start businesses, etc. So Ivy Tech really was, in my mind, an incredibly and is. I'm more committed today than I was 9 years ago. That it's an incredibly important institution to the state, and I thought I had a very good background to understand higher ed, to understand workforce, and to understand business from all of my previous perspectives.
mhm. And for anyone who's listening that doesn't know what Ivy Tech kind of looks like, can you maybe describe the
Sure.
structure a little bit?
We are the nation's largest singly accredited statewide community college system. So we have 19 campuses, more than 40 locations across the state of Indiana. We do anything from a short-term credential, a certification through associate degree. We have transfer agreements with every state school. So, and in Indiana, that is required by law that if you take, we have of those 180,000 students, we'll have 80,000 plus in high school who are taking dual credit from their credentialed high school teacher or dual enrollment at one of our campuses, through many thousand students who are coming straight from an employer to earn either a degree or a credential with us to upskill. So we do all of that, and we're a very unique institution because of that single accreditation, which means the state gives me as president $250 million a year to run this institution. The other funds are raised through tuition and other fundraising. So it's about a $500 million operation with about 4,000 full-time employees and about 9,000 all in with part-time. So it's a really big institution.
Yeah. So, as the leader of this very large institution with a lot of decisions to make, a lot of money to disperse fairly, what are kind of your goals for Ivy Tech
Yeah.
at large?
Yeah, so it is to become the community college that our state and each of our communities need us to be. So we've set a aggressive goal of 50,000 degrees and completions a year aligned with Indiana's economy. When I arrived, that was about 20,000. So we're over 40,000 now, on our way to 50,000. It's to make sure that we have all the emerging industry degrees and credentials like semiconductor, biopharma, battery technology. We're the economic engine. We help recruit the large employers that are coming to Indiana because we will skill up their workforce. So
Mhm.
really being aligned with that work is really important to me. And then just thinking about the future of higher ed, not everything is going to be a bachelor's degree in the future. We see that in the news every day. So in IT, it's much more certification oriented. And so we're growing rapidly that in those areas as well as certifications that go outside of traditional education that are employer focused. They are the things that industry wants. So we're seen as very innovative in how we deliver to those careers that people are going to go into, but also our how we fund what we do. Our tuition model, you know what the books cost for you. We have Ivy Plus tuition and textbooks. Our students pay $17 a credit hour for all their course materials, less than $50 a for a book. Um, so that is incredibly affordable. And we do that by using IE skills that mean scale. We take our scale and we negotiate with publishers, we negotiate with bookstores to drive out cost
Mhm.
and to give that benefit to our students. So we're redefining how post-secondary is done on the back end as well as what people see on the front end.
Mhm.
So it's a beautiful place to use all those skills.
Mhm. I remember seeing the Ivy Tech billboards in Evansville during school and thinking how nice that would be.
Mhm. Yeah, so we're continuing to make change at scale, and that's the exciting thing of having a big system.
Mhm. Now, when you eventually leave Ivy Tech, do you have any plans for what comes after?
I am on 3 corporate boards right now, so I serve in, corporate boards are paid positions where usually you have to be a CEO or a president to be on a corporate board. So I serve on One America, which is a large mutual insurance firm. I serve on German American Bank's corporate board, which you know from Southern Indiana, and OFS, which is a $500 million family owned out of Huntingburg. And I've just been asked to be on a fourth, and I will join that in the fall. That will fill me up. Each of those take about 2 weeks a year. So I'm doing that right now, burning the midnight oil, trying to serve all those using every vacation day for those. But those are important. There are too few female leaders who are
Mhm.
available. So board membership is not only is it good financially for me to do that, it is the right thing to bring women into those boardrooms where they were lacking and they're still sorely lacking. And I'm finally at a point in my career, it was after I left LG that my phone started to ring for those kind of things because of being a proven senior executive leader, which there just aren't enough women and persons of color to fill those roles.
Mhm. Well, I know we've discussed a lot today, but looking back on all that you've experienced, what makes you most proud of your younger self?
Probably just doing the things that I never knew if I could do them,
Mhm.
and trusting that even though it would be easy to fail, that I just wouldn't, or I'd figure it out along the way because I think so many times I didn't have the skill set to do what I was being asked to do. But every time I was given a challenge, I was able to learn and grow and learn from others and figure it out. And each time you do that, you get the confidence. That's how you build the confidence to do bigger things. So I think I'm glad. Probably the thing I'm most happy that my parents did was when I said I wanted to co-op at General Motors in Flint, Michigan. They could have easily said to that 19-year-old, you can't go 8 hours away by yourself for a summer and all the risk that came with that. Now, during that summer, I did experience sexual harassment. So they were right. There were bad things that could happen, but that far was outweighed by the positive outcomes of allowing me to grow up, to figure things out, to be my own advocate, to grow up, right? So I owe a lot to them for trusting me enough and for raising me, working in the store all those days, to have the confidence and the ability to work in a professional setting and take what I was learning at Purdue and do good things.
Mhm. When you experienced that sexual harassment, did you report that to HR or anything?
Who would have ever thought, you know, I wouldn't have known to do it and no one ever suggested it. It's the
Mhm.
one thing I tell every young woman when she works for me or with me, or if I'm talking to young women like you, is do report it. You need to do that. You don't have to go around fearful of the job. I knew in manufacturing, I could not go on the shop floor with the person who was my boss that summer, but I got real smart, and you don't let bad things happen, right? And then you get smarter. So as a female, you there were lessons that were learned, and you hope that others don't have to learn them, but you can certainly warn them and try to prepare them. It happens much more rarely today, and it better never happen at Ivy Tech because I won't tolerate it. But those were things that were just part of
Mhm.
getting tough and um, making your way through.
Mhm. Well, I appreciate that advice, and I especially appreciate you standing up for the students and faculty at Ivy Tech now.
Well, we've come a long way, baby, that's for sure. So,
Mhm.
all right. Well,
Well, as this interview comes to a close, I'm excited about the impact your story is going to have when we share it with our audience and we continue this conversation. So just thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us.
you're welcome.